yesterday. I was going, I should not think about it. Just think, yes, I got up, I had breakfast, yes, I did that. Not even think about what it was.
Where were you?
I was in Texas.
Oh, you were down in Texas, okay.
And my flight back left at 6 a.m. So that meant
Was it 1 or 2 hours ahead there?
it's 2 hours ahead of here. And if the flight was at 10 in the morning, then I could probably rationalize it. Having it leave at 6 a.m. in the morning. That's the best flight to get back on, because I know I'll get there.
You do it.
I don't know.
You're gonna be here. I don't need to be here, right? Yeah.
John, do you remember, did Floyd tell us whether he was going to be able to be here or not? I don't remember a recent email, but it could have been said at the last meeting, and I
remember he couldn't be there for the work session. He couldn't be there.
Right.
I thought that special about it.
You ready? Tammy?
1 second.
Not us,
Like the
but since he was a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I tend to
Right, something
print
that
size.
crazy starts. Yeah, that is nuts. I remember one time walking in my room, and I see this young.
How they do.
Good afternoon. I call this meeting to order of the Yelm City Planning Commission. Today is Monday, October 21, 2019. Have you taken a roll call of the council?
John Thompson,
Here.
John Graver,
Here.
Ann Warman,
here.
Jerry Fugich,
Here.
Carlos Perez,
Here.
Robert Howard.
Here. You all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Has everybody had a chance to review the agenda for today? If so, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I make a motion that we approve the agenda.
I second.
Okay. Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the September 16th, 2019 minutes, which are attached?
Here, select.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Public communications.
I've not received any outside public communications.
Public hearing? Any? Nothing? Okay. Unified Development Code update. We all have this right here. Have everybody,
If anybody doesn't, I have an extra copy.
so do I. Yeah. And as we can see that the changes that are in red, and do you have anything you would like to?
If you don't mind, I would like to, for the benefit of our audience today, go over what the Planning Commission was asked to do, the background work that you've done that's come to the proposals that we have in front of us today. With the proposed changes and the type of changes this is, I took it upon myself to invite the local developers and builders and also real estate agents from the city that we've worked with in the past, and let them know that these are some changes we're looking at, hoping that once they see the proposal today, maybe hopefully attend the open house on November 4th, and to be able to come to the public hearing in November and provide any comments, proposed changes, whether they like it, whether they don't. It would just give some more input. And we'd like to have as much input from the public as possible. So thank you all for making it out today. So the Planning Commission was tasked to look at the Unified Development Code for two purposes. First, and I don't have anything other than the red line copy. First, we needed to look at the Federal Communications Commission rulings on locating wireless communication facilities within rights-of-ways. This came up partially from the small cell broadband issues that have been going around. We also needed to clarify within the code that we meet the certain regulations that they have. So I'm going to switch to our staff report just really quick and talk about the changes we did for the wireless communication facilities. And so you can find the package that you have before you is in order of chapter in the Unified Development Code. So the first section that we had to update for the wireless communication facilities section was our chapter 1810, which is our project review processes. And a couple of the items that was not clear in our code that the FCC requires is that we have a specific timeline for determination of completeness for applications for wireless communication facilities. You can find that information on page 2 of chapter, the package of updates. And that includes the wireless communication facilities. We have to give the applicant notice within 10 days of whether their application is complete or not. That is different from the standard land use application proposals where we have 28 days to determine the application complete. Then when you have a notice of final decision, when you give an approval or an approval with conditions, the final decision for wireless communication facilities is to be issued within 90 days after the notice of completeness. Again, our standard land use is 120 days. And it also goes into a little bit of definition on the calculation of those days. So that was clarified in chapter 1810, and those are those are known in the wireless communication world as shot clocks that are required from the FCC. The next thing we did is towards the back, starting at page 33 in the wireless communication facilities. There's a difference now between having a wireless communication tower and then locating wireless communication facilities on existing structures. In the right-of-way, that it might include light poles or electric poles or traffic signals, anything that might be within our right-of-way now. And we had no definition of what small cell broadband meant, what it might look like when it's within our city right-of-way. The other thing that was very clear through the rulings was that you cannot propose design standards in such a way that it creates more regulation for the wireless communication facilities as you would any other facility that might locate in the right-of-way. So our proposals for chapter 18.70 talk about the different kinds of the wireless facilities, sizes to be able to be within our right-of-way. If their wireless communication facilities are going to be within our right-of-way, a franchise with the city is required. And then there's a full section on pages 38 and 39 of our design standards for locating within the right-of-way. And then the last page, page 40, includes radio frequency standards where federal law provides that the federal government has sole jurisdiction to regulate the field of radio frequency emissions. We can request and require that they provide us documentation that they meet that. However, we cannot condition or deny an application based on our determination of radio frequencies. So that is what we are proposing for the wireless communication facilities section in this update. Any questions?
I offer one more copy to the other attendee that came in. I apologize, the print font is that you're using.
So if the commission has had an opportunity to look at the red lines and agree this is what we came up with months ago, then we can move forward into the affordable housing portion of this update. Flipping back over to a map that we can look at as we're talking. So the Planning Commission was also asked to review our development regulations and to look to see if there's any way that we can encourage affordable housing in the city limits from within our development code and our development standards and guidelines. So the Planning Commission met, and the first thing that I'm going to say we because I was with them. The first thing.
Could we turn the lights down a little bit so that we can all see that?
John, there behind you.
Just maybe shut the first. Yeah, which one to do it? There you see.
That's better.
Okay. The first thing that the Planning Commission did in looking at the affordable housing was to define what it was that we were going to be looking at within our development regulations. With affordable housing, there's different types of housing that can be looked at, and the Planning Commission chose at this point not to look at low-income housing and extremely low-income housing, as in order to deal with that, there's many options out there, many ways you can require it within your zoning code. There's tax options that are available. There's different tax options available through for funding for this type of housing. However, in order to look deeply into it, to find out a needs analysis to determine how many units we have, what our vacancy rates are, what our needs are, what our population housing medium income is, things like that really requires a full in-depth study. A lot of information to compile and to be able to support the requirement of providing income or housing for low income and extremely low income housing. This is something that is outside of the Planning Commission's and myself, our realm and our role. And if the City Council would like to look into those types of options, I think we would recommend that they move forward with a housing task force or affordable housing task force or something to do the studies required to give the backup information to be able to support changes for that. With that in mind, then we went to our development regulations and looking at development that has occurred in the city over the last 20 years to determine what is affordable housing and how we were going to look at that. That meeting, we discussed a lot of different issues. First of all, what is the current market trend with the housings that we have? What are some barriers that developers might have in providing more affordable housing within the city? Some of the barriers that we came up with are the market trend that the houses that are selling today are large houses on small lots, and if that's what's selling, then that's what builders are going to build. The material cost, labor cost, and land cost are all ever changing up and down. That is not something that's addressed within our zoning codes. financing available to developers and builders to build other types of housing other than the standard single-family housing. Those items are all outside of our development regulations and are barriers that we cannot address with the zoning code. So those, even though they play into what is happening in the residential development within the city, that is not something that we can address. So then we look to our development regulations themselves to see if there was any barriers to building within the city. One of the items that we looked at was the density and the different types of density that's allowed in city limits. This map kind of portrays some development that's occurred over the years. In our R4 zone, the single-family housing pretty much has achieved 4 units per acre. When you move into the R6 zone, which has a minimum of 3 units per acre and a maximum of 6 units per acre, we find that the maximum density is not being reached. And just in this handful of areas that I chose, we can see that some of the R6 zoning has achieved 4.46 units per acre, 5 units per acre, 2.6, very old subdivision, 3.9 units per acre, and 4.9 units per acre. So out of the 1,680 possible dwelling units we could have got in the R6 zone, we only achieved 1,110. So then we wondered why they weren't achieving the density. We looked at the amount of room needed for streets and open space. And even if taking that into account, there still is enough land to be able to meet the density. If houses were smaller, if a variety of houses were met, such as townhouses with 0 lot lines, duplexes, multifamily, and those types of developments are already allowed in our code with the planned residential development or our townhouse zoning overlay. So this is available already, and we wondered why people are not taking advantage of that. Part of it is maybe they don't know that it's available or understand that they can look at different development options, such as lot sizes, road standards, and so forth, if they go through the planned residential development. Also, allowing a density bonus, maybe if there was a density bonus, the developer might be more incentivized to build along with single-family houses, some duplexes or townhouses or other variety of houses to be able to reach the density and still have an inventory of the market trend houses that we have. So we also looked at increasing the minimum density requirement. If it was R6, what if we just didn't, put in our development regulations that you will have 6 units per acre? And so that would force the different variety of housing or smaller houses on smaller lots. So with those that we looked at, the Planning Commission is proposing no change to our minimum density requirement, keeping all of our zones. R4 would be up to 4 units per acre. R6 is a minimum of 3 units per acre with a maximum of 6 units per acre. And our R14, it's R16. Our R16 zone being a minimum of 8 units per acre and a maximum of 16 units per acre. We are proposing a density bonus if you do a planned residential development or a townhouse development. Depending on which zone you're in, there's a different percentage of density bonus that you could receive. That would allow or help try to meet the variety of housing. And then the last thing we did is we looked at the high density zone, and there's very little high density zones right now that are vacant for development. And so with this change, the Planning Commission is proposing to not allow single family housing in the high density zone, but to require multifamily type housing within the R16 zone.
Tammy, do you have the zoning map available? Show where that is?
This is our current zoning map. The bright yellow is master plan community. The light yellow is our R4 zoning. The orangish color is our R6 zone, or light orange, and then the dark orange right here is our high density zoning. There's a little bit of high density zoning here that was developed out. This section has been developed out. This is owned by the school district, so that leaves this area right here onto Homa Boulevard and these parcels down here onto Homa Boulevard. That's all that's in our R16 zone. That would be for development. Did I cover pretty much the density information that we just, I want to make sure that I represent what you said accurately. Parking was one of the areas that we were asked to take a look at as well. Right now, our residential parking requirements are 2 per dwelling unit. We looked at the possibility of changing parking, knowing that right now in our residential developments, the 2 parking stalls that are allowed in the driveway and garage, we're finding that there's lots of cars on the street, and I hear often at the counter problems with neighbors, with people having too many cars out on the street because their driveways are full. Planning Commission decided to keep the minimum of 2 parking stalls for single-family homes. However, we looked at parking requirements for multifamily dwellings. And as with everything that I do, I always look to other cities to determine what they do and what are some options they've looked at, especially if it's a little more creative than what we do. And found that there's a couple cities that provide parking requirements for multifamily dwellings based on the number of bedrooms. And so we looked at a possibility of changing our parking requirements based on the number of bedrooms, and that is going to be found in a table on page 24. That's why it's really impossible to see up there. And that would be for single-family houses, keeping the 2 per dwelling unit. If you were able to achieve an accessory dwelling unit on your site, it would only require 1 parking stall. For duplexes and multifamily units up to 4, we kept the 2 parking stalls per dwelling unit. But once you provide multifamily with over 4 units, then we looked at providing parking reductions based on the size of the unit. So 1 space for a studio apartment, 1 1/2 spaces for 1 and 2 bedrooms. So it would be a total requirement based on the number of 1 and 2 bedrooms offered in the facility. And then if they're 3 bedroom or more, they would require 2 spaces per unit. And then 1 guest space for every 10. There's nothing worse than going to visit your family at an apartment complex and having absolutely nowhere to park. Multifamily constructed along major transit routes, that would be along 507, 510, the new Yelm Loop. When apartments are constructed where there's bus stops within walking distance, which would be considered along the major transit routes, then we looked at reducing it for 1 parking space for studio and 1 bedroom apartments and 1 1/2 spaces for 2 or more bedrooms. Building height and setbacks. For residential, this single-family housing is allowed to be 35 feet. We did have a request at our last meeting. We had a property owner come in, wanted to build a garage, had a large lot, wants to build a garage to be able to keep his travel trailer in, but our maximum height for an accessory dwelling unit right now is only 16 feet from ground to the peak. When you have a travel trailer or motorhome or fifth wheel, you're not able to achieve the door height to be able to get the unit in. And so raising the accessory building height would help those people that do have room for accessory dwelling units to be able to build a unit that would be able to house that. So if you can achieve an accessory dwelling unit to be able to do that, we looked at changing the height restriction. We looked at a few different options, such as making sure that the height of the accessory dwelling unit was no taller than the height of the existing single-family home, but found that that might not make it if somebody has a single-story home, manufactured home, whose building height at the peak might only be 18 feet. So the Planning Commission is proposing to raise the height limit for accessory dwelling units to 25 feet. In our high-density residential zone right now, our current code states that multifamily units can be 35 feet in height or 3 stories, whichever is less. However, there was a height restriction of 25 feet if that residential or the multifamily was done in the R16 zone when it was adjacent to a lower residential zone. And this seemed kind of it didn't make sense when a single family home can be 35 feet, but a multifamily dwelling couldn't be right next door. So we're looking at removing the 25-foot height restriction and just allowing all multifamily buildings to be 35 feet no matter what zone they're adjacent to. Looked at possibly raising height restrictions in the commercial to achieve mixed housing. They decided not to go there at this time and provided no change for that. Looking at our street and open space requirements as a possible barrier. Looking at reducing our street cross sections, making streets smaller within the subdivisions. This is already allowed in our planned residential development and would be part of further review when we update our transportation system plan. So at this time, we'll just plan to leave it as looking at it through the planned residential development and not changing our standards until we go through the transportation system plan update. That would also look at removing on-street parking, whether on one side, both sides, or no sides, and then looking at reducing open space requirements. Planning Commission at this time is proposing no change. So the red lines that you have before us reflect those changes, and the only thing that I didn't actually call out specifically is when we talked about knowing the planned residential development, you get different standards and could have a density bonus. So in our residential zoning sections, we did add under density that density bonuses are available for townhouse and planned residential developments. That way, anybody going to look in the R4, R6, or R14, if they're looking at how many units they're allowed to achieve, they'll know that there's an opportunity for a bonus if they look at something a little different and outside of the standard housing. And I think that's what we've covered. And red lines reflect the Planning Commission's hard work and a lot of review and a lot of discussion.
So now, basically, this results of this will go to the open house for comments from the public.
Yes, we've scheduled an open house for Monday, November 4th at the community center, and it's not on the agenda, but it's from 5 to 7. I'll be sending out an email with and mailing, I believe. I have some mailing lists that I would like to include on that. I've sent the display ad to the paper. It will be published in the newspaper. It's from 5 to 7. Hopefully I can get some bigger boards so that we're able to see these without a magnifying glass. And Planning Commission and myself will be there to be able to answer questions. Now that people have heard this, they can take the information, dwell on it. Did we miss anything? You know, is there something more we could look at? Do you agree or disagree with what we're proposing, and if so, why? The next step after that would be the public hearing. Planning Commission will have a public hearing where we will accept official testimony. That is Monday at the next regular meeting, Monday, November 18th at 4 o'clock here at City Hall. And if at that point there's any changes we need to make, we'll make those changes and forward the recommendation to the City Council for adoption. If there's no major changes and we can get the red lines done very quickly, I hope to be able to bring this to the City Council meeting. It's the second Tuesday in December. I think it might be the 10th. I don't have that date in front of me. It would be heard then. They may do a first reading and then adopt early January, or they may adopt it at that meeting. If there's major changes or something comes up where we can't get it at the first meeting in December, the second meeting in December is Christmas Eve. I don't believe they'll be holding a council meeting on that day. I have a feeling they will cancel that one, and then it would be then heard at the first meeting in January, which is the second Tuesday of the month.
So actually, now you've an overview of the changes to the Unified Development Code update. It'll just, we don't need a motion or anything from it. Okay. So then I guess we go on to the next item. Right.
Unless you'd like to see if anyone here.
Anybody would like to make any comments?
Questions or comments? Okay.
I just had one comment actually for myself. That was for Doug. And 35 feet, you're going to make a three-story nice condo. 5 feet.
It's pretty tight. That'd be one of the comments. If you're doing a 3-story, you need to figure at least 10 foot per floor.
Right.
By the time you get your top floor, it leaves you 5 foot for a roof. And depending on how wide that building is, you're going to be down to less than a 312 pitch, which now we're into metal roofs.
Yeah.
And that's going to be pretty close.
What do you recommend?
Probably push at least 38, maybe 40 feet for 3-story.
40 is a nice round number.
Yeah.
I like to see.
I like 5
the slope on the roof.
12 pitch roofs, just
And it's
It'd be good to
aesthetically
bring that to the meeting and get that input in.
Yeah.
I think that what we can do, what I hope to do for the open house is to provide a little bit of maybe some visuals, which go online and pull some pictures of the difference between a 35-foot, 3-story building, be able to reach that, and then a 40-foot and what those roof lines would look like. If that is definitely a barrier to development, then we want to make sure that we're addressing that. Also knowing the difference of what planned residential development or townhouse development might look as opposed to the single-family residential subdivisions that we have now, so that people can understand what it means if we're looking at increasing density. One thing I did fail to mention in the work session and the background and looking at this is when you look at increasing density within the city, we need to be careful in looking at increasing density as all of our capital facilities plans, all of our planning for water and sewer and streets and storm, all of that planning is based on population projections. Population projections are looking at full build out of the city based on the zoning that we have. So if we were to increase density, is that going to cause a problem for our capital facilities planning in making sure that we're going to have adequate sewer, adequate water for the developments that occur? Looking at a density bonus in the R6 and R14, knowing that right now we're not really even achieving the maximum, would be probably not going to be a major ripple effect unless all of a sudden everybody started building out, and then we would need to look at our capital facilities plan to make sure that we're not going over and above. But as this map shows, you know, we had to plan for 1,600 units and only 1,100 were achieved. So I don't think that a density bonus at this time is going to cause a huge issue. The other thing we didn't discuss was accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units are allowed right now in the city of Yelm. There's a couple issues and barriers that we have. The residential subdivisions we have right now, the houses are pretty much fitting within the building footprint and filling up all of the required building setbacks that we have. So there's really no room to put an accessory dwelling unit on your parcel unless you're attached, and it's like converting your garage or an add-on where you have an attached dwelling unit. Part of the issue with that is if you have a 4-bedroom home and a standard step tank within our city, adding a studio apartment is going to push the usage onto that step tank. It's sized for a 4-bedroom. Once you go over a 4-bedroom, your step tank needs to be increased in size. So there's a limitation there. At this point, looking at making sure there's enough room for an accessory dwelling unit or reducing setbacks for an accessory dwelling unit really doesn't fit into the subdivisions as we have it now. Did look at the possibility of accessory dwelling units on some of our larger parcels, and that happens mostly in our downtown area. The lots are a little bit larger. There is room for accessory dwelling units. The central business district does not have specific setbacks for commercial, but there are specific setbacks for residential in our central business district. So we looked at reducing the setbacks there for accessory dwelling units, and that's for the central business district section, that and the one stall for those units. So trying to find a way to maybe get some more accessory dwelling units in the downtown area.
I'm curious as to why can't we address this height level now, or change it now? Because it sounds to me like that's really a technical matter, an issue, not an arbitrary thing that we just pick a number.
Sure.
It has to do with the physical thing.
Yeah, you gotta look at the size of the house. If it's a 30-foot wide house and you got a 6 slope on it, you're gonna have to be pushing the envelope. And I think we're probably better off. I agree with you, and I'm Bob, but too, that we be realistic so that it looks good, because you get too flat a roof and it looks like a daggone trailer.
Yeah, and there's no need to, we don't need to, compare one with the other. I mean, we all know that 40 foot is the best way to go. Let's do that. Why don't we just change it now?
Are we talking in the high-density residential, or are you talking all?
I know the high density
Townhouses.
townhouses, the 3-story units should.
Isn't that high density?
Multifamily units.
Yes, multi should have a height of 40 feet. Your width is going to be a lot different.
Yeah, 45 is what we saw. Sorry, Evan Mann with Sound Built Homes. Developed townhomes for several years all over the Puget Sound, and 45 is basically if you're looking at 3-story anything. 45 was our number that we typically would like.
It's 45 feet then.
40 would work, but yeah.
It would only be in the high density, because it might be pretty intimidating if you had a 45-foot house and a regular.
Yeah.
Everybody else is
All right,
2-story.
that's where I was going with that. So if we wrote 45 feet or 3 stories, whichever is lesser, then if they need
Yeah.
the 3 stories with the 45 feet, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if they come in,
Does the city allow habitable attic space as well? All right.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Does the city allow habitable attic space as well? I mean, if for instance you did a 45 foot, could you get habitable attic space in the trust?
Over three stories?
So technically it's not, if you look at the residential building code, the RBC defines it as a habitable attic, not a 4th story. So it's kind of it's a gray area, if you will, but I don't know if the city's.
I would have to ask our building official. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that.
But it increases the overall square footage of the unit in a way that some builders will take advantage of.
For people, like a loft.
All right, I will make that
Can I ask
change.
another question, Tammy? Sure. On page 30, you got a minimum square footage on your townhomes. You're just talking the lot has to be a minimum of 1,600 square feet?
The lot shall be a minimum 1,600 square feet. And 20, and a minimum 20 feet width.
That's for the lot, not the unit.
Correct.
That's a 20 by 80 lot.
Pretty small.
No, that's actually really big.
That's big.
That's real big for a lot. That should be.
You got 0 lot lines we're dealing with.
You're looking at the lot line, okay.
Yeah, if you're talking about 0 lot line, that's really big. You would
Yeah,
want,
okay.
you would want, really it's, if you think about a 20-foot wide townhome unit, the depth is gonna be 40. And that footprint there is much smaller, obviously. I mean, it's gonna be 40 to 50, maybe. But, and that would yield a 2,000 square foot unit. So, I mean, if you make it then 80 feet, because that 20 by 80 is what you're gonna have to be at to get to that 1,600.
1,600.
Yeah, it just makes a bigger lot. And I look, going along with that, item number 5, the 300 square feet of private yard space, I would suggest that you allow that to be accomplished in patios and decks as well. So second floor patio or deck.
And the way it reads, correct me on that, I was gonna bring that one up, it's gonna be one either or, can it be a combination of front yard, backyard, side yards to get to the 300? The way this thing reads, it's gotta be one or the other. If you're trying to get this higher density, if you can get this square footage down in the lot, combine this 300 square feet, then you're gonna start being able to get your density up in the areas that you're trying to achieve there.
I would add to that basically that with our townhome developments, a lot of times you're looking more at community green space, right? We oftentimes will do like a green court between the front doors of units, right? So instead of having them front to a street like normal homes, you would have the drive or the access at the rear, and the front would be to a green space.
And they all face each other.
Right, and it's a communal green space. So then you go, well, how did we meet the 300? We technically don't, because that's a community space, but it is activated by walks, planters, things like that. So again, that 300 square feet per unit, if that was like across the whole project, that might make a little more sense versus each unit having a segregated 300 feet of its own little yard. That's, we would call it, a lot of time we call it defensible space, which was a lot smaller at that point. You'd say 5 feet off the front door across that full 20-foot width. That's technically what you would call your yard or your defensible space but then other than that, allowing those private yards to be more group oriented towards the whole community. Does that make sense? Common area.
Common green area.
Yeah. More common area, less private area. That's generally how townhomes are operating. A lot of people don't even want a yard to mow.
Exactly, that's probably why they want to go to a townhome in the first place.
Yeah. So to give them 300
That yard.
Yeah, 300 square feet of their own space, a lot of times they end up, am I going to have a yard waste bin? Doesn't make sense.
Well, for the lot size, what would you suggest? Right now at 1,600 square feet.
I guess that's the good question. Technically, we don't typically see a lot size when you do townhome developments. You just see a unit size and then let the market decide how big the lot's going to be. As long as the overall parent lot is I'm going to go ahead and guess that it's not economically viable to do a 12-foot wide townhome in Yelm. But if somebody was able to make it work,
It's pretty narrow. You can't even get a staircase in.
You still gotta market these homes to somebody.
Right, and that's so really your market here is not going to drive that kind of thing as much as I think you're going to see bigger.
In New York City.
You're saying that the lot size is not something that should be so specific.
I'm open to suggestion on that. I technically don't think the lot size is all that
You're
important.
trying to meet a density, and the development will drive that. As long as, if you've got a minimum density, why do you need a lot size if you measure minimum? Some of these may be 20 foot wide, some be 12. I think I've only seen those in alleys in San Francisco,
Yeah,
but.
no, it's rare. I mean, that's something you see in a very highly urbanized community.
But yeah, so maybe instead of a minimum lot size, you put the minimum density on there if you're going there, something, so leave it up to the developer, decide how big he wants to make these units.
Because you
We
could
gotta sell them, we gotta come up and market
could
them.
have 12 and 20-foot ones, depending if you had a desire for a smaller unit, somebody for lower cost.
Yeah. And-
That's what we tend to refer to those things as, instead of affordable housing, we call it attainable housing, right? So you have, you do some mix, and maybe you have an 18-foot or 16-foot wide. That unit's gonna sell for less, obviously lower square footage, less desirable footprint, but
It gets you in the place.
sure, it hits a different,
It's a starter home, right,
Yeah.
if you will. Absolutely.
So Tammy, how would we reword this item 2 here?
Well, I think a possibility and a very simple way to address it is to remove the minimum lot, the minimum area of the 1,600 square feet and the minimum building width of 20. That way, if somebody does come up with a 15 or a 12-foot wide, they can. So if we just eliminate number 2 altogether, that gives them the freedom to move around and like you said, to offer both normal sizes and smaller sizes, I guess.
And then the area relative to the yard space too.
Yeah.
To make the suggestion of the communal type space or whatever, just to.
does the city currently have when you do a plat, I'm not terribly familiar yet, when you do a plat, do they have like a minimum, per unit square footage that has to go towards like parks or recreation space?
Yes, we have a minimum square footage, 5% of the total land area is open space for single-family residential development and 10% for multifamily.
If you just if you do leave it at that and just this 300 square feet, we
Throw that out.
Whether we make it common or specific to each one, give the developer the option.
I can see where, I wasn't here when this code was written, but I could see where a person might want to have a private patio or backyard outside their back door to be able to barbecue or put a fence around for their dog, little dogs.
But if that's what it's gonna take for us to sell it, we're gonna do it.
That was the same thing, it's a marketing, that's a marketing issue though.
Right, but what I'm saying is being able to, it was intended to provide that if, maybe they want to fence in an area for the kid to play or keep their toddler enclosed. I can see where they felt it was
Giving the
important
300
to
feet.
give a little bit of privacy in, but again, our codes were written in the mid-90s and times are changing. So is it as important to offer them privacy? I like the idea of including patios and things like that as part of their private space.
I think that's a very good idea.
Maybe not so much a specific 300 square feet, but,
Combination.
a combination of something if they have a communal open space, which is kind of what the open space requirement is.
I wouldn't be, I think having each individual lot have their own space is fine. But like we were talking about, could it be a combination of front yard, deck, and backyard, kind of like a variety. So between the variety of areas, not like rooftop decks are gonna happen here, but if they did, you wanna get credit for that as your private space, right? So then you go, okay, if you're doing a deck and a patio, combined, that's equaling out to whatever the square footage you guys decide. That then could suffice, instead of saying it has to be ground floor, front or backyard, 300 square feet, you tend to give a little more flexibility. But having it defined is always helpful. The predictability is key.
And the advantage too would be scalability. Basically, if a lot of people are going to say are looking for that little private space, if you don't have it, you're not going to sell it. But by the same token, if you have that space, then it is an option that you have.
To require it, it's a problem in the footprint, Then you're.
I see though, maybe 300 feet is a little excessive.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, that's 10 by 30. If you had a 20-foot lot and you have a driveway in there of 10 foot for one car, a 10 by 30 is requiring a bigger rear yard than our setbacks now of 25 feet. So maybe reducing that number and providing the opportunity to mix those private areas as.
Yeah, that's the advantage. If you have part of it in the front and part of it in the back, you're not required to have 300 feet, plunk.
Right.
Somebody goes out with a
That's
ruler.
what caught my eye on this right away. The way it read, it had to be one of those 4 options, not a combination.
Yeah.
And
But
since
if we can reduce that,
10% is required for green space for multifamily already.
10% for
10% is-
space for multifamily.
So if 10% is already required, then if you count that open space as, for the total project, as part of this, somehow the calculation was,
Well, I mean, one of the things is, do you want to consider 300 square feet as an accumulative thing? Are you talking about accumulation part of that 10% and part of the decking and part of the patios?
If
Is
you
that
were
what you want to
thinking of
consider?
somebody wanting, some dude wanting to go out and barbecue, and he doesn't want somebody standing there staring at him as he's burning his hamburgers.
he's
you know?
gotta,
Well, it's gonna be
he's
in the
gotta
wrong
get
place.
one.
10 by 10 will work.
He's gotta
Smaller.
get over to Cherry Meadows.
Yeah.
Right, and then, you know, a standard patio out somebody's back door is 8 by 10, 6 by 8. You know, that's 120, 140 square feet. Being able to go out your back door and sit in a lawn chair and not look in your neighbor's window or have your neighbor look in your, you know, watching you there. I see where they're going with this. They want to make sure that the townhouse development does provide a form of single-family living. I see that.
But if you got three floors, and I'm just wondering how you're gonna accommodate that for somebody not being able to see
Yeah.
where you are.
So, forgive me, townhouses are, there are probably a million different kinds of ways you can do that, but a townhouse is generally a single-story or two-story or three-story, single-family home. Once you go into units, townhouse, not condos, but into the other, then you're more into a multifamily apartment type complex. Because townhouses are 0 lot lines. If you can't have a second floor townhouse, it'd be a condo.
Yeah, what's the definition of the two? What's the difference between the condo and the townhouse?
A townhouse has 0 lot lines, so they have common walls
Okay,
between 2 individually owned dwelling units. A condominium can be a unit, whether it be on the 1st floor or 10th floor. It's just the unit itself where the land is commonly owned by an association, a condominium association. So a condo is a unit where a townhouse is actually a single-family dwelling. It's not a multifamily dwelling.
And they own the front and back, but not the sides.
So if you have a 3-story, then it's their 3-story. They have a main floor, a second floor, and a third floor. It's not somebody living on the second
Floor is a
floor.
lot of times in the second floor.
And
Yeah.
again, that one comment, the word yard, all of a sudden,
There is
3
a
years from
yard.
now, somebody's gonna say, oh, it's gotta be grass. And we need to make sure that portion is a combination of private space or whatever you wanna call it. I'm not sure what a good buzzword for it is, but we don't want it to all of a sudden say, oh, it's gotta be green grass.
It's not gonna be.
Well, but as it is right there, somebody could say, it's gotta be green.
I guess then the question is, do we want to require a specific amount of private yard or private space? Or do you want to just take it out altogether and let the developer?
I think it's the developer's decision. If we have the plot of land available and we have the density requirements, then it's up to the developer to determine what's gonna sell on that piece of property, whether it has common ground, non-common ground, communal, or whatever, and whether or not, and so long as it's, fits the definition of a condo or a townhouse or townhome, then I think we should leave it up to them. So I would say scratch it.
So scratch number 2 and
That's
number
mine.
5.
Number 5.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I would.
Number 2 is the minimum lot area and the minimum building width. You choose to scratch that one as well.
I would caution that, I mean, obviously you're making planning decisions for the health of the community, right? And so there's you obviously, you want some of those things regardless of, you know, Joe developer may say, I can sell anything, even if it doesn't have that open space. I would say you do probably want some sort of a standard there. It's pretty common. But again, allowing the flexibility in where those private open spaces are allowed, front yard, backyard, deck, and then, you know.
So you allow the 30 feet, but how you do it is the developer's business.
Sure, how they get there, they're providing an amenity, but how they get there is flexible. It has a variety of options. But I think I don't know that just removing it completely will end up in a positive, a net positive for the city. So
What if you just left it without a minimum square feet? Every lot containing a townhouse must provide a private area or space oriented either to the front, rear, or side. And then it's left open to
Or
sides.
combination, don't make it just one or the other, front, rear, side.
yeah,
Combination of those four, or three, the sides, front, or rear. So your
No, that makes sense.
spaces, you know.
But then you go back to the catch-22, if you don't have a specific of 30 feet, okay, I gave the guy 3 feet, he can stand there and turn around.
You gotta have a number there.
So I think you're gonna have I think you'd put a number that 30 feet is not bad as a combination.
30 feet is different from.
Enumerating that though, Tammy, if you have an 8-foot by 6-foot deck on your second story, and you were able to count that, how many square feet, you know, how you start to do that math, and you can get up to 200 or 300 square feet pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Well, and if you have the deck above, you're gonna have a landing underneath, you're not gonna have that common open space. So
You're gonna have a front stoop. You're gonna have, you know, so there are things that you can get credit for that have value.
But you're giving a specific 30 feet, so that not doing that danger of saying, hey, I gave everybody 5 feet, what's the big complaint?
Right.
You turn around, 2 people can stand on it, standing up.
I think having that, I don't know if 300 is the number, but having a number there is
Not bad, no.
it's gonna be
300
you
would
want.
probably work.
Well, I'm glad you gentlemen came in.
I've done a lot of townhomes. I did have a question about the PRD, the planned residential development. How many have you had over the last 5 years?
Can I,
Okay.
before we answer that, would you be willing to let me do some research on other townhouse developments? Kind of get an idea, and maybe we can even put a range of 100 to 200 square feet.
Yeah.
And then,
Because the only ones I'm familiar with are the ones that my own family's been, you know, people have been living in Seattle, and those don't have any private space. So I was going, whoa, I don't have.
Yeah, but see, in Bellevue, they do.
so that can be, I can update that part of it, and then we can have it at the open house.
Yeah.
And that'll allow all of you to think about it, maybe come up with some ideas of your own as you guys are thinking about it, being able to come back and say, hey, I like what the compromise we came up with.
I don't think, I mean, I think one thing for you, I mean, when I first read that number 2, the 1,600 square feet, I thought that was talking about the unit square footage, which, again, if you're trying to avoid micro housing, maybe something you want to avoid, it doesn't hurt to put a low-end square footage on there and say, okay, if you're doing townhomes, you can't do townhomes that are less than 1,000 square feet. That's just not quality. And I mean, I don't think anybody in this room would be selling a townhome that's smaller than 1,000 square feet in Yelm. So the character of Yelm could be more suited towards, you know, 1,200 square foot townhome or, you know, that. So I don't think it's necessarily bad to have that number in there to protect from the micro housing movement, if you will. But something to keep in mind.
I've had one planned residential development application in the 18 years that I've been here, and it fell apart due to the recession and project forward.
Ask, is there another code section that defines how the creation of permanent open space by preserving and creating environmental amenities superior to those generally found in conventional development? Is there another code section that defines how that I think that right there is why no one will ever do a planned residential development, because it's too amorphous and it doesn't, thrive, or we thrive on predictability. If I can't put a predictable number to what the city's gonna say, okay, yeah, you've met your standard for better quality, I'm opening myself up to essentially coming in my hat in hand and saying, hey, what will you give me? Versus, hey, your code allows me to do this, and we meet the code here, 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 and here. But I think that's probably part of the reason, and we've shied away from planned developments for a while in a variety of communities, although we have one here. But I think because of that concern of having to negotiate some of those, what's the amenity we're giving and what are we getting out of it. I certainly agree with the incentive idea. I think having incentives to up the density helps, but there's a risk involved. It's not predictable.
Hard to be very specific. I think the intent is if you're looking at doing a planned residential development and you're looking at offering different street standards, for example, that maybe when your street's going through, you have no parking when you leave. Say your planned residential development has single-family homes and some multifamily, whether it be townhomes or duplexes or fourplexes. That maybe your single-family area, the street standard between the two change. And then when you get in the multifamily section, maybe it's a no on-street parking, alley load access, and the open space component that's a little more is that community open space that you're talking about. So those are the ideas and things that would come forth, and how can we reduce our minimum requirements or set standards. It just has to be not the residential subdivisions that are the squares,
Right.
you know, and straight lines and, you know, the
It's hard for us
houses.
it's hard for us to see beyond that, though.
Right.
It is. I mean, honestly,
But I also don't want to limit it either.
Sure.
It also allows it if you had a piece of property that had a hillside or an environmental issue such as creek front, that you could use that as your open space and not have to provide something over and above that.
Right.
So those are kind of providing the options and not setting a specific standard on what's required. Get creative and let's get something.
I go with you on that. I don't have a solution to that necessarily.
Right.
I'm just telling you that is why, generally speaking, developers shy away from these planned residential developments, because I just don't know, and I can't pro forma prior to purchasing or prior to getting under contract with that property what my result will be competently, right? So I can't write my numbers up and go to them and say, I'm fairly certain I can get this out of this property and give you a good price, but I just don't know after however long it takes, 9 months of negotiating what I'll end up with. And if I don't have that, then it's very difficult to
Would
make a project roll.
it be helpful to have examples from other communities of how these have been done?
There are examples. I think, a lot of them are like if you set aside a certain percentage of the site, like 25%. I think that goes a little bit counter to what you guys are hoping to do with your, unless the overall density is packed into that remaining 75. Setting aside good developable property is something we don't love to see. If you're setting aside critical areas, that's great. But so there's I guess you could look into some other communities and what they do with their PRDs, but something to keep in mind. I don't have a solution off the top of my head how to solve or get people interested in PRDs. I think it could be a little more clear. This is exactly what you have to provide in order to take advantage of a PRD, and it doesn't have to be too crazy, but some standard will approve it.
What we've always tried to do in our zoning code and our design standards is not be so strict that you can't provide options. One of the challenges we have in our commercial zone is that we have to have some wall sections like you see around Rite Aid and that you see around Walmart and down by the Starbucks. They have the rock wall. We had a developer that said, but my building is going to clash with the rock wall. The Dairy Queen complex built their wall with the same brick that they built their building with. Looks very nice, still meets the intent, got yelled at for not having a rock wall, but some people didn't appreciate that. We also then had that same regulation with Olympia Federal Savings. They didn't want the rock wall because it didn't match their building. We told them they had to come up with something, so they changed their building to go with the rock wall. So we always want to make sure there's a little bit of flexibility, because somebody might come in with a design that meets the intent but might be a little different than what someone else has envisioned. And I'm in that same thing. If it was a square residential subdivision with one swing set in a corner lot on top of a storm pond, I'm going to say that's not over and above anything. That's not superior to anything that we have. But if you wanted to do townhouses around a cool open space with maybe a small little wading pond and a play area, then wow, that's amazing. Let's work with them and get that in there and lessen some of the other stringent requirements. To me, that's how that works.
The density boost is a good starting point.
Yeah.
If you don't see any movement on it, I think it could be further defined. Yeah. I had a question about the roads as well. What's the current standard for a typical flat road? Is it 60 still or 50 or?
It's 58, but generally 60 with the slopes on the side.
So yeah, I mean, we're seeing all of our jurisdictions kind of shifting back towards a narrower road section. I think during the 90s and early 2000s, there was a big push for basically a boulevard serving everything, and so you saw this move towards shifting closer to 60 every time you go to a different jurisdiction. But I think we're starting to see that tracked. Right now, we're getting 44-foot right-of-ways in Pierce County, and that's full service. I mean, it's parking on, I believe, on both sides. I mean, they're full roads. I think there's opportunity to bring that road standard back down to achieve what you're looking for, because again, it's just more property the city has to own and maintain, and it's counter to Washington Department of Ecology standards, where they're trying to do less pollution generating surfaces and things like that. So I think anything you guys can do to push that road section down to kind of more of a minimum requirement or need.
That will be up and coming in our transportation system plan update standards, and look at the different ones. But yes, that's absolutely in the realm of what we're going to be looking at in the near future.
Okay, I guess that took care of that area.
So I will make the changes that we came up with. I might shoot out some different examples, maybe on the open space, and then prepare some visuals for the open house on the 4th at 5 o'clock at the community center, and tell all your friends that it's going to be fun. Exciting and
Donuts?
You have nothing else to do on Monday night? Why don't you come to the open house?
oh, let's see, Monday Night Football or
Oh, no.
uh-oh,
That's Monday?
I didn't think that one very well, did I?
You have a big screen in there?
Hey, what if we did I could bring my 32-inch monitor over and we'll just have that going in the corner.
Yeah, but then nobody's gonna be checking then we'll have to bring any boards.
Either that or, maybe pull up the NFL